So today we're going to begin talking about the Happy Cat Mouse Toy Crochet Project. But before we begin to actually crochet the project itself, I want to take an opportunity to talk about some of the techniques involved in crocheting that we'll be using today, and some just general good practice that you'll want to use for this project, and should you decide to continue pursuing crocheting. So for this project, we're going to create what's a very small swatch with our yarn today. And it just gives you a general feel for how the yarn feels in your hand and how it all comes together on the hook. And it's usually a good idea to do this if you haven't used the specific yarn that you're using in general for a crochet project, or if it's been a while since you've crocheted, it will give you a chance to kind of get a feel for it once more. So we're going to go ahead and use our yarn, and we'll need our scissors, and I'm going to go ahead and use the G hook, which also is 4.25 millimeters. Sometimes that's the designation you'll see. I'm not sure if you can see that terribly well here. I have a yarn needle. We probably won't use it for the little swatch. And I also have a stitch marker to just kind of show you how that all comes together. So what we're going to do to begin with is we need to create a slip knot. And in order to create a slip knot, we need to get the end of our yarn. And I'm going to go ahead and create a loop with the yarn. And then I'm going to wrap this is the tail, that you'll often see this referred to as the tail. So I'm going to wrap the working yarn, which is the other side. So we either have the tail or the working yarn. This is the working yarn, so I'm going to wrap it around behind. And then I'm going to take my fingers and grab the yarn in the middle and pull it through. And when I do that, I let go of the working yarn with my offhand, so that way it can draw itself tight. And I can tell that I've done this correctly if I pull both ends of this slip knot and it starts to disappear. And then when I finish pulling, I just have a straight strand of yarn once more. So that's how you know you've gotten an adequate slip knot. So let's do that one more time. And we're going to go ahead and create our loop. We're going to take this part of the yarn, the working yarn, and bring it around behind. And I'm going to reach through that loop and grab the working yarn, and I'm pulling it through. And as I'm pulling it through, I'm letting go of this part of the loop and holding on to the tail. So that way it makes a good slip knot. And the slip knot is a very helpful tool because it will allow it to be adjusted for tightness. So that's one tool that you want to make sure that you practice quite a bit, is the slip knot. Okay, so what we're going to do now is talk about tension. And tension is very important because obviously you don't want your stitches to be either too loose or too tight. And in order to do this, and there are multiple ways of doing this, but the way I was taught to do this is to use my non-dominant hand, my offhand, which for me is my left hand. And you use this to kind of slow the yarn down, so that way it doesn't go too quickly, and it also kind of maintains an even kind of stitch. So to do that, I loop the yarn. I'll do it this way so you can see a little better. I loop the yarn around my fingers like this. And then this part will come here. The working area will get pinched between my index finger and my thumb. So that way I will constantly be shifting what this hand is doing And it can be a little confusing. Just make sure you go slowly at the beginning. And I'll go ahead and show you one more time how I got my hands here. So we're going to loop it around your fingers. And I always use my index finger as a good final brace to make sure that that tension is maintained. And again, you can either pinch the loop between your index and index and thumb, or your middle finger and your thumb, just depending on the stitch that you're using. And it's all a question of what's most comfortable to you. All right, so now we can begin to do one of the most basic stitches in crochet, and you see this frequently. It's the chain. And in order to chain this stitch, we're going to take our hook, and again, this is the G hook that I'm using, that we'll be using for our pattern. And I'm going to go ahead and insert this in the slip knot that we made earlier. And I'm going to give it a little bit of tension. You want to be able to have it slip, but you don't want it to be so loose that the stitches are going to take a lot more work for you. But you also don't want it to be so tight. If we pull it super tight, it's going to be hard to draw the next loop of yarn through. So a little bit of room. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do is this is called yarning over. So I'm going to wrap the yarn around my hook, and I'm going to pull it through. And that is one chain. And usually when I finish chaining, I tighten it just a tiny bit, and then I draw the slip knot back so that the stitch again is not becoming huge. All right, so let's do that again. That is one chain that we just did. And I hope you can see that it kind of has the appearance of a little bit of a V with the loop coming out of the top. All right, so we're going to do the second chain. So again, I'm going to grab the yarn with the hook and draw the hook through the knot. And then again, adjust it just a hair. And there's my second chain. Okay, I'm going to do 10 chains, and then I'm going to do a couple of rows of single crochet just to give you an idea and a feel for how this is going to feel generally. All right, so we've got 2, and I can see if you can look at the side. So if you look here, here's my little V's. There's 2 chains, and you can kind of see how you can count them. So 1, 2. So if you lose count, you can always stop and see what you've done. So there's the 2, and then there at the very bottom is the slip knot that we've made. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and chain some more, and I'm going to do this very slowly so you can follow. So I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to draw through the loop, and then I'm going to, it's pretty snug, so I'm just going to go ahead and tighten up my slip knot. There's the third. Okay, so there's the 10 of our chains. Before I go on, I do want to tell you a few things that can happen as a troubleshooting for you. So if I were to do a chain and I were to, if you can see my hook here, if I were to grab the top thread, grab parts of the other thread, it won't look quite like the other ones. And I've kind of usually end up with this a little bit of a spot that looks odd. You know, it's not looking like it's coming directly through the loop. If you find yourself in that situation, just withdraw the hook and pull out one. And you can even pull out a couple, so that way the yarn smooths itself. Because sometimes once you've made an error like that, the yarn will be a little bit snarled. So it's really a good idea to just back it up a little bit. And that's the nice thing about doing these chains, is they come out. So if you pull, they'll actually just pull out. You can pull all the way back out to a one continuous piece of yarn. And so you don't have to feel like, oh, I'm committed. It's really not not too bad to back out your stitches, okay? And again, the important part is you want to make sure that you know how to count. And again, I'm gonna show you counting stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay? So that means we still have 4 more to go. All right, so I've got my row of stitches again, and then what I'm going to do here is, now that we've finished a row or as long of a chain as we're going to make, I'm going to need to turn and go the other direction, and I'll show you how to do that. So if you think about how we're making this, we're going to make a line. I'll take this off for a minute. So we're going to make a line, and then we're going to come back and go this way and make another line and attach those. And then we'll come back and make another line and attach those. So I'm planning on doing 3 rows as a very small swatch. If you feel like you need more practice, please feel free to do more. More practice is usually better. So you do whatever is most comfortable for you. But in the interest of time, I'm going to do a very small swatch. So now that I've got 10 chains, the traditional way to turn is to chain 1, and then what we're going to do is, on the way back, we're going to do what's called a single crochet, and it's a very basic stitch, and I'll show you how that works. But we're going to single crochet all the way back. So since we did a chain 1, to turn, because we want to give ourselves a little bit of room, we're going to skip this first chain. So I'm going to skip this chain, and I'm going to begin in this chain, all right? And as we can see, counting those chains is really a helpful thing, because then you know where you're going when you start stitching on the way back. So again, skipping this first chain, and I'm going to poke my my crochet hook through this part right here. And then this is the first part of that single crochet stitch. And now I've got 2 loops on my hook. All right, and then to begin the crochet stitch, I'm going to grab the yarn and pull it through the first loop, okay? And again, now I'm going to have 2 loops of yarn on my hook, and then I'm going to grab the yarn again, and I'm going to pull it through both. And one of the things that can be very helpful to know that it's a good trick. So once I yarn over, I automatically start to turn my hook down. And the reason that's very practical, because if you keep your hook turned up, you can see, I think, that it's going to cause a little bit of an obstruction. But if you turn it down, you're actually pulling the yarn through the part that's least likely to resist, okay? And so when you're done with your single crochet, it should look like this from the top and like this from the side. And I think as you'll see, you're going to see how this is going to look a little bit better. And I always snug my stitches up a little bit and then readjust my working loop. Okay, so once again, we're going to do another single crochet. I'm going to take my hook. I'm going to go to the very next stitch. We don't have to skip any longer. So I'm going to go to the very next chain. And now I've got 2 loops. Okay, and then I'm going to yarn over and pull it through. And again, make sure when you're pulling it through, you're twisting your hook just a tiny bit. And then you only pull through 1 loop on that first pass. And then I'm going to yarn over again and pull it through both, okay? And then I snug it up, and I go ahead and make sure my loop has got enough room. So now we've got 2 single crochets. Sometimes, a couple of tips for you. Sometimes people wonder why I go this way or this way for a particular stitch. Honestly, it really doesn't matter. You have to do what feels most natural to you while you're doing the stitch. So if it feels most natural to loop and grab your yarn this way, do it that way. If it feels most natural to do it that way, do it that way. Kind of start as you progress as a crocheter, you're going to want to think about what's easiest for you. All right, so let's go ahead and go with the next stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and take my hook again, and I'm going it directly into the next stitch, and I'm going to go ahead and just push it through. And so now I've got 2 loops on my hook, and for the first, on a single crochet, for the first pass, I'm going to go ahead and just draw through the first loop. And for the second pass, I'm going to draw through both. Okay, so now I'm at 3 stitches. And again, this is a useful thing for you to learn how to count these. This is a little bit a longer stitch because we had that chain involved, so, but I have 3 now. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay. And so now we're going to go ahead and once again, as a troubleshooting point, if you notice that anything looks a little bit odd with your stitches, like perhaps you haven't gotten all the threads, just back it up. The exact same thing works. You can just pull on your working yarn, going back to the ball of yarn you're working with. Just pull out the stitches and start again. It's usually much easier than trying to correct what you've done. All right. So now I'm back to 2 stitches. So I'm going to go ahead and redo that stitch and pull it a little snug and go ahead and take care of my hands to make sure that the gauge is good. The gauge is another word for tension when you're talking about needlework. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and take my crochet hook and I'm going to go ahead and push it through just that 1 loop of the chain. And I'm going to grab 1 yarn over and just through the 1 loop and grab another yarn over and pull it through both. Okay, and again, we're in 3 stitches. So I'm going to go ahead and progress to the end of my row. Right, and then there's 4 stitches now. So I'm going to go ahead and push through this 1 row, excuse me, this 1 chain, and then I'm going to yarn over, draw through the first loop, and yarn over and draw through the second loop. Snug it up a little bit, and then loosen my working loop. Draw through 2 and snug it up just a little bit, and then go ahead and tighten your working loop. And as I'm going, you want to make sure that you're adjusting your hand position. So as I go forward, I move my non-dominant hand, and I have to usually correct the tension. Eventually, it will become automatic. And the last one, we're going to go ahead and push it through the last chain, grab that working yarn and pull it through the first loop, grab the yarn and pull it through both. Okay, so this is an example of what your first row will look like with single crochet. And you can kind of see they refer to these often as posts, and that becomes more important if you pursue this and get into different kinds of crochet. But we're just going to do a very straightforward second row of the same type. And what we'll do is, instead of going through 1 loop of the chain, because that's all that's really available when we're talking about the chain, we're going to go through 2 loops of the single crochet. There are styles in which you can go through only one or the other. So you could only go through one loop or the other loop, but we're going to go through both. So we're going to plan on going through both of those loops. All right. And so to turn again, just like we did the first time, we're going to chain one. Okay. And then I'm going to turn the whole work around. All right. And so now this is what the back side, the off side looks like. Okay. And so we're going to do single crochets all the way across. This is the last row we'll do. If you are feeling like you would like to do more of these, please feel free. Like I said, the more practice, the better for you. It really does help you feel more confident, and it can be very relaxing after a while. The very beginning, of course, learning a new skill does take some work, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead now that we're turned, and what I'm gonna do is I'm skipping the chain, this very first chain. I'll indicate it right here with my little yarn needle. And we're going to go ahead and go through both loops here of the first single crochet that we did. All right, so I'm going to take my crochet hook and push it through both. So now, and this is, the chain is obviously as the first row, it's going to be different than the rest of the rows that you would do. Right now, I have 3 loops on here, okay? I don't know if you can see the 2 from the single crochet and then the 1 with my working loop. So I'm going to yarn over here and I'm going to draw that yarn over through 2 loops, okay? And that's pretty standard for the single crochet. So I'm going to yarn over, pull through 2 loops, and then again, pull through 2 loops, okay? And there's my first single crochet of my new row. Now, one of the things that you will notice as we go along is that you need to make sure that your row is even. It is easy, particularly when you're at the very beginning of learning how to crochet, to make your rows not come out even. If this happens to you, it's really typical. Don't worry about it. The best thing to do is just unravel what you've done, pull the yarn out, and then pull it back to a point where it's matching. Okay, and then once you get to that point, then you can go forward again from there. And you do get used to unraveling or ripping out a lot of stitches. It's just part of the learning process. And so as long as you're braced for that to happen, you should be fine. Make sure to give yourself a lot of breaks. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and tighten up my loop a little bit. And then now I need to go to the next stitch. And one of the things that I think is really nice to point out with the close-up camera is you can kind of see the differences between the stitches more easily. So you can see how the stitch that we just completed is going to this particular loop in the work. And you can see, if I pull up just a little bit, how that loop is different from the next stitch. And so it really can help differentiate where you need to be when you're doing your crocheting, when you're needing to go to the next loop. There are some, and we will get into this with our Happy Cap mouse toy today. There are some features in which you want to do 2 stitches in one. And so it's really important that you learn how to tell the difference differentiate really clearly between your stitches. So again, we're going to go ahead and do our next single crochet. We're going to go ahead and push the hook through both of those loops. Should just go straight across like this. And I'm going to grab my yarn, pull it through those first 2 loops, and then grab my yarn and pull it through the second 2 loops. And then I snug it up, and then I pull my working loop back a little bit, okay? So we're gonna do that again. I'm gonna take my hook, push it through the next stitch, grab that working yarn, pull it through, And then again, grab that yarn and pull it through. Snug it up a little bit and then let it go. Now it is important that you do it snugly, but not too tight, because as you can see, we need to have enough looseness in the yarn so you can get through the next one. If you do it too tightly, you will have a hard time pushing the hook through. So it takes a little while before you get a good grip for what is a kind of a balanced, not too tight, not too loose. When I was just talking a moment ago about making sure your ends are fairly even, counting stitches will actually help you keep from putting too many or too few stitches in. So if you know you've done a row of 10 and you know you're going to need to do a row of 10 on the way back, it really does help keep you from putting in too many or too few. So again, we're going to just reinforce that whole counting idea. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we've done 5. This part here, this little edge, is our turning chain. So we've got 5. So I know I need to do 5 more. All right, so I'm going to take my hook again, push it through both loops of my single crochet from our previous row, and yarn over, pull it through again, and pull it through both. And sometimes if you find yourself kind of having a hard time getting a good angle, you can use your fingernail to help pull over the yarn on the hook. That's usually what I do when I get stuck. All right, so here is my very short swatch. It's standard, and here's the other side too, so you can see both sides of it. Look, it's pretty standard to do kind of an inch, a couple of inches by a couple of inches for a swatch, just to show that you have a good gauge on it. You want it to look consistent the whole way through, about the same size stitches, and so this is a good practice for us. So what I need to do to finish off is I need to kind of give myself a little bit of an extra length of the yarn, and I'm going to go ahead and cut right here. You just need a little bit of it. These are a little on the long side. So in order to finish off, all I have to do is I'm going to take my my hook, and I'm just going to pull it straight up. And as you can see, as I start to pull it straight up, this yarn starts to get drawn through it. So at a certain point, that yarn is drawn up and we've finished. Now, of course, all you would have to do to unravel it is to pull this off. So what you want to do in order to properly finish the piece is we're going to weave in the ends of the yarn through the stitches. And I'll show you how that works, just so you have an idea of what that looks like. It's not always necessary to do it on a swatch unless you're going to enter something in some sort of, you know, competition or something like that. But we're not even going to think about that. We're just going to do this as a practice for finishing off. So we're going to go ahead and practice finishing off, just to make sure that you're familiar with it. Now you don't need quite this long of a tail on either end of this. To weave it in will actually take longer, the more tail you have, obviously. So I'm just going to trim it off just a little bit so that we have maybe a little bit more than an inch maybe. And it doesn't have to be perfect. We can give ourselves a break. All right, so there's my little tails. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my crochet hook and push it through the stitches, just like I was going to make another stitch. And I'm pushing it through both. Then I'm going to grab my working yarn, my little tail here, and I'm going to draw it through just like I was making a stitch, but we'll kind of work it through so that way it kind of hides it a little bit. So I've got it through that, and now I'm going to flip it around, and I just do it. You don't have to flip it around, but I just find it easier to do it if I'm pushing the hook through rather than pulling it through. So then I'm going to grab my yarn, I'm going to work it through there. All right. So we'll just keep going. And the trick of it is not to weave in forever. It's to hide the ends of it and also to keep it from getting unraveled. We don't want anything to happen where something snags the end, that working end that we were at, and then just unravels all your work. So that's the point of working those ends in. And I'm going to do the same thing on our starting end. And for some people, they we've got all of our ends tucked in. So sometimes people think, and they have some really nice products out there that are fabric glues to kind of glue ends together and things like that. It's not necessary, but if you feel like it should be more secure, sometimes particularly for toys for children or for pets, as we're going to be doing today, people want to feel a little bit extra secure. So I just wanted to interject there that you can use just a dab of glue at the end if it makes you feel better. You certainly don't have to. Of course, you want to make sure it's non-toxic if it's going to be a pet or a pet toy or a toy for children who might put it in their mouths. So just make sure that if you do decide that you want to use any sort of fabric glue, that it is non-toxic. But again, it's not absolutely necessary.